Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is episode 11 in the ongoing series dealing with the events of 24 years ago today in the JonBenet Ramsey case. And 24 years ago today, Access Graphics had kind of a $1 billion sales luncheon in the Hotel Boulderado, and we're going to talk about that in a second. I have to tell you that in preparing for this video, I probably spent 2 hours just kind of going through, kind of just glossing over all the information just around the sort of Access Graphics aspect. Now, what I want to remind you of is we started this series on the 10th of December, around about 10-11 days ago, and what I brought up in that particular episode was the landscaper talking about JonBenet feeling like she never really was seeing her father, that she really missed him a lot. Do you remember that? It was the gardener Brian Scott who saw JonBenet in sort of mid-December, and JonBenet was actually crying and telling him that she really missed her father, and we can sort of speculate and say, you know, perhaps JonBenet was so busy with pageants that took her away from home. Or we can say perhaps John Ramsey was so busy with his work that took him away from home and from JonBenet. But what about both? What about both happening at the same time? That JonBenet was very busy with her pageants, and John Ramsey was, you know, he didn't just become entrepreneur of the year in Boulder for nothing. You don't become an entrepreneur of the year by sitting at home. He was obviously very entrepreneurial that year, and we're going to kind of go into more detail. But before we do, I want to just kind of open your mind and open your imagination. I want to sort of ask you to think just in a very broad way. In the same way we've sort of asked the question, do you think there was a link between the pageants and what happened to JonBenet? And, you know, on the one side of that question, you could say, was some sort of, could you find a suspect in the pageant pool? In other words, you go to the pageants and there's some weirdo sitting in the crowd, right? But there's another way to look at that, and that is to say, what about the people around her? Were they affected? Were they stimulated in some way by JonBenet taking photos of herself, or shoots being done of JonBenet, her dressing up, her being made up, and all that kind of thing, right? Now, in the same way that you can sort of ask that question both ways in terms of the pageants, you can ask the question in terms of the business. You can say, did the huge amounts of money Access Graphics was bringing in, did that have an impact on what happened to JonBenet? And I don't think you can say no. On the one hand, again, you can argue, could it have been some stranger that, or some disgruntled employee that kind of was envious of what was going on, right? But on the other hand, you could say, what was the sort of ordinary impact of John Ramsey working as hard as he was working in 1996? I mean, you don't have the success that he had without working very hard, without being at the office a lot, without being preoccupied, taking calls, all that kind of thing. Did that have some kind of impact on the dynamics at home? Not just with his daughter, but with his young son as well. It's a question. Was that a factor? And then you can take those things in combination. You can say, could there have been like a combining influence of the pageants and John Ramsey's success in terms of a disgruntled employee? And that's kind of a long shot, because now you're saying, did a disgruntled employee attend these pageants, right? Because whoever wrote the ransom note talks about money and talks about John's business. So does it make sense that there was a kind of a disgruntled employee who was also interested in the pageants, or almost the other way around, that someone who was attending the pageants kind of read the paper and saw something about Access Graphics. Now, you might see something there, but one thing that you can't argue against is that the impact of the pageants at home and the impact of the sort of busyness, the busyness of all these family members, John, Patsy, and JonBenet, had to have had an impact at home. So in other words, what you cannot argue against is that the pageants had an impact at home. It certainly had an impact on Patsy, on what Patsy was doing, and the kind of working life of John Ramsey also had an impact on the home life. Do you agree with that? And one of the simple ways that you can express that is that John would take his family to Pastor Jay's. I think it was every second day or every third day, but at least twice a week, and that is where they would have dinner. Now, if you think about dinner as a time of family fellowship, it's a time where a mother is in the kitchen, she's cooking, you've got to go grocery shopping, the children might be hungry, they might come into the kitchen and nibble on something, but it's kind of, that kind of thing tends to be the glue that holds families together. Dinner time at home, dinner, preparing dinner, and the sort of, I don't want to call it foreplay, that's a terrible word, the sort of activities that are associated with what happens before dinner and after dinner, meaning in the home, meaning whether it's watching television or kind of hanging around mom's apron strings in the kitchen, getting a little, tidbit to eat or whatever. But when you eat out, and the Ramseys were eating out quite often, as I say, every second or third day at Pastor Jay's, that's kind of lost because now it's kind of a more formal situation. The children have got to be better behaved, and you get what I'm kind of getting at in that sense. So in this episode, I do want to talk about Access Graphics on its own merits, and we'll get to that in a second. Before we do, if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do. You can click on the icon on the bottom, blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So this is a very big subject, and it's very difficult to know where to start, where to begin, and what tip of the iceberg to sort of start covering, if I can put it that way. So I think I'm just going to start it in general terms, in terms of the timeline, and just say, okay, so on the 20th of December, so just 5 days before what happened to JonBenet happened, this is now very much coming into the critical red zone of the timeline. In other words, whatever factors were in play that were going to lead to the events of Christmas Day, obviously the night of Christmas Day, very close to midnight, in fact, of Christmas Day, those events were now crystallizing into something. So in other words, those dynamics are already there, but now in the last 5 days, the screws of those conveyor belts, of those dynamics, are strengthening, they're tightening, the trajectory is becoming absolutely certain, right? And so one of the things that happened on December 20th was a $1 billion luncheon at the Hotel Boldorado, right? And so what happens there, that is where John Ramsey spends the day. Now, if we just take that day in isolation, that's what we're going to do now. We're going to look at one day in isolation and say, what were the broad implications of that day? So first of all, let's bear in mind what day of the week it was. It was a Friday, okay? So it was 24 years ago today, a Friday, and that makes sense that that Access Graphics on this Friday would have kind of a big party, so that you could sort of, I don't think they would have the party and then go back to work. I think they would have the party, it would probably go on until possibly quite late in the afternoon, even into the evening. I don't know. But something like $1 billion turnover is a huge milestone. And the article in the Daily Camera the very next day kind of starts off with exactly those words. It's written by Tom Locke, and he says, it's written for the very next morning, but dealing with the day before. It starts off, $1 billion, that's enough to make anybody celebrate. And I want to put those terms into perspective, into context. If you had a business and it had made $1 billion in turnover, wouldn't you want to celebrate? Now, what I can tell you is, quite recently, I wrote my 100th book, and I'm nowhere near $1 billion in turnover, let alone $1 million, right? But what I can tell you is, reaching that number 100 was quite a big deal for me. And I wouldn't say I had a party, but I certainly went to some friends. We had a barbecue. We had a couple of drinks, and we kind of raised a toast and said, to the work that we've done. And it went on for a couple of hours. There weren't fireworks, and it wasn't that elaborate, but it was kind of a big deal. And now, how much bigger a deal would it be if it's $1 billion and it's not just one person, but it's hundreds? And, it's sort of shared success. And so that is exactly what happened. It was quite a big party. It was a luncheon at a hotel on a Friday. A Dixieland jazz band was there. And so was obviously John Ramsey, the president of Access Graphics. And he thanked about 300 employees at the gathering. And he sort of thanked them and said, I couldn't have done it without you. And this $1 billion in sales was a 25% increase over the 800 million Access Graphics posted the previous year. So there was a 25% increase in, whether you want to say turnover or profit. I'm not sure if it was necessarily profit, but the point being that this company was growing. And how does a company grow? Well, through hard work, through meetings, through networking, through business trips, through knuckling down and getting things done. When a company is growing, people tend to be working hard, and we all know that the computer industry was really exploding in the middle 90s. I mean, what we take for granted now was rolling out across the planet at that time, right? And a lot of this kind of growth was internet fueled. So the internet was kind of creating a market for people to want computers, right? It's a funny thing, because the computers were making the internet happen, but it was also working vice versa. And I did mention somewhere that when the JonBenet Ramsey case happened, Shirley Brady, ex-housekeeper, she ran kind of an internet page, and at that time, Silver Surfers were literally buying computers so that they could participate in this sort of Ramsey spectacle that was happening online. It's arguably the very first major true crime case that really inundated the internet, right? The case that sort of preceded it was the O.J. Simpson trial, and that was a television trial, if that makes sense. And another case that was also very high profile was Scott Peterson, was also kind of televised, and that is why it was such a big deal. So anyway, the point being that this was a very big party, and it was based on incredible sales, and this was a time to celebrate that. It was kind of like the last, how can I put it? You've reached the end of the year, and now you want to kind of put up and the end of the week, and it's approaching Christmas, it's approaching holidays for the employees and the employer, and and it's a time to sort of kick off your shoes, let your hair down, have a couple of drinks, and relax and just enjoy yourself, right? And in a situation like that, you could say, well, if there were problems at home, would you be dealing with them? Would you know about them? Would you what would you be focusing on? And there's nothing, it's a little bit like me going to celebrate my books scenario, and I leave my dog at home. And I didn't actually. I took my dog along. But all I'm saying is, you could justify that, and you could probably say, no, well, that's understandable. I can understand you leaving your dog at home and going to a barbecue and enjoying yourself. But the thing that I'm just trying to emphasize in a gentle, reasonable, straightforward way is just to say that anyone would want to celebrate this, and wouldn't you then be distracted from something else that is maybe also deserving of your attention, but certainly shouldn't you be celebrating something like this anyway? Does that make sense? If we just stay on this news report for a moment longer, at the milestone party, John was saying, he expects to reach another billion in revenues, in other words, 2 billion. And he was saying he expected that before the end of the decade, and that was a certainty. And so that was where John Ramsey stood at that time. He recognized this incredible potential of the company that he'd built. He was enjoying incredible success, and he absolutely knew that he could rely on that success going forward. Of course, the thing that he didn't know was what was about to happen. 5 days from now, that was going to turn his kind of business fairy tale on its head, right? The other thing that the article states is that he reached the billion-dollar mark relatively quickly. So if you think about the fact that the company was formed in 1989 and they reached $1 billion in around about 6 years, that's quite incredible. And it's basically 3 companies that became Access Graphics. Basically, as far as, if I'm reading this right, CAD Distributors, CAD Sources, and Advanced Products Group of Roswell, Georgia. And that's the company that John Ramsey sort of started. In 1990, Access posted 59 million in sales and had 120 employees. Revenues grew 1,600%. Employment has grown 358%, and so on. And we're going to get to this in a second, but what's, I think, one of the most underestimated aspects of the JonBenet Ramsey case is this little known fact, this little expressed fact. Access Graphics was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bethesda, Maryland-based Lockheed Martin Corporation. And through these relationships, Access Graphics had an important mix of products and companies that it represented, including Hewlett-Packard. Does that name ring a bell? Sun Microsystems, Silicon Graphics, and so on. And so this allowed his company to dip into a much bigger pond, right? So if we come back to the timeline, so at the same time that John Ramsey is having this big luncheon, obviously the press are present. The press are, taking a photo of him, enjoying his success, and so on. And there are a couple of photos. At the same time, they are writing an article about everything. And this is where you could say, did this article in the media prick somebody's conscience? Did somebody see this? And what is quite interesting is at the crime scene, someone had drawn a picture or kind of put, I can't quite remember exactly what it was, but there was a picture of John Ramsey. I don't know if it was the Entrepreneur of the Year picture, and someone had drawn something around his face. And you could argue, was it a child that did that, or was it some kind of some kind of criminal person? But why on earth would you do that and then take the magazine into the home? Now, why on earth would you identify someone and then take the magazine with you into the house, kind of thing? So also on December the 20th, Bull McReynolds was sort of recruited into a Christmas party that was going to take place 3 days later. Now, if I can read between the lines, so in the the book the Ramseys wrote, they kind of have it that Bull McReynolds called Patsy and said, "Hey, I'd like there to be a Christmas party. Will you organize one and I'll be there," kind of thing. Right? That's kind of how it's presented. I don't think that is how it happened. I think how it happened was I'm not sure if Patsy was even present at this party, but I kind of get the feeling that she wanted to participate in the parties. She wanted to also celebrate John's success, but in a different format. So not like at this hotel, but kind of at their home, and kind of have stacks of people over and just toast their success, not just John's, hers as well, and JonBenet's as well. Have this sort of big party just to celebrate the Ramseys are here. You know, we are kind of kicking ass and taking names kind of thing. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Patsy called Bull McReynolds and not the other way around. Anyway, the official story is that Patsy said, "I didn't plan to have a family Christmas party in 1996. Really?" This is Patsy we're talking about. Someone who loves pageantry, who loves parties, who loves dressing up, who loves pageantry just in general. And according to her, she didn't even want to have a family Christmas party at all. But she did because Bull McReynolds called her on the 20th, on that same day. And his story was that someone was doing a TV program and it was going to be in Boulder and would be filming him as Santa, and he wanted to include her party in the filming. And so he strongly encouraged her to have the event. So what is quite strange here is in her story, Bill already knows about the party. So it seems like there was a party going on anyway. So that was what was going on at the same time as this luncheon, right? I don't know whether Patsy attended the luncheon. I don't see any pictures of her there. But one thing we know for sure was where JonBenet was. And probably where JonBenet wasn't that where Patsy was. The other side of the story is that I don't think John could have been where JonBenet was that day because he was at this luncheon. I mean, that's just a simple explanation for he wasn't where she was because he was busy with his things and she was busy with her things. And where was she? Well, she was doing a performance. Now, previously, I think I did mention that on the 17th, that was her last pageant. Actually, that's not accurate. She gave another pageant on the 22nd, and we'll deal with that in the episode after the next one. I think I must do a part 2 to this episode, just talking a little bit more about Access Graphics. But let me just end off with JonBenet's performance doing Rock Around the Clock at the High Peaks Elementary School. So this was kind of the last thing that JonBenet did in terms of school. I don't know whether she went to school after this, but it was also, bear in mind, it's a Friday and the kids want to be sort of sent off towards their weekend and maybe their holidays, and so JonBenet is giving them a performance for that as well. Now, she's just given a performance 3 days earlier, and 3 days earlier Patsy called the doctor 3 times because something happened. We don't quite know what happened. Anyway, let's deal with December the 30th. And this is from a posting on websleuths.com. While the Access Graphics buffet was taking place at the Hotel Boulderado, JonBenet and Patsy were at JonBenet's school where JonBenet was performing Rock Around the Clock for the students. And JonBenet had to prepare for that. JonBenet had to prepare that performance. So while a lot of her other friends had just homework to worry about and had whatever to worry about, JonBenet had she was like performing for her schoolmates to worry about. And that's just another thing just to bear in mind is, so think about what it was like for all the other school kids. All the other school kids are kind of normal kids doing their normal thing. And here is a little girl dressed up in this fancy way, almost like a celebrity, made up, dolled up, hair dyed, performing for them. And what are the little children going to be thinking? What are the little girls going to be thinking when they see her performing? What are the boys going to be thinking when they see her performing? It's just another context to maybe think about in terms of this case. If some of the children have good things to say, how is that going to make JonBenet's brother feel? If some of the boys have bad things to say, how is that going to make other people feel about this? How's JonBenet going to feel about it? One thing I don't think you can get away from is that JonBenet was directing a lot of attention to herself, and also John Ramsey at that time, and also Patsy Ramsey at that time. Am I leaving anyone out? Okay, I'm not going to take it further than that. In the next episode, I will be doing kind of a part 2 on Access Graphics, just going through a little bit more information. I also will take you through Patsy Ramsey's newsletter for the family dealing with the Christmas of 1996. She wrote one just about every year, and so we're going to look at the newsletter and also the handwriting in the newsletter. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.